All right, welcome back into the podcast. Very excited to do this guest. He's been nice enough to come on every year the last few years. He is the big dog on the Chicago Bears beat. He's been doing it for over 20 years with the Chicago Tribune. He is Brad Biggs, and he joins me now. Brad, Bill Zimmerman, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Bill?
I'm doing okay, and I'm really excited you agreed to do this, especially around this time of the year, because the Bears have 5 games left, and most fans are starting to pivot to 2024. I think there is about 1% that is dreaming of the Bears running the table here after that Vikings game and making a playoff push. But I think most are looking ahead. And if I'm going to do that, I want to kind of talk about job securities and potentially what may be coming down the pipeline here in about 5-6 weeks. And I think to do that, I have to start with Kevin Warren. And maybe see what kind of semblance of an idea you have in terms of how his role is going to be, evaluating this season, because I think that's the wild card here for everyone. Is we just don't know, does he have, final say, or is it just suggestions to George? Because I know a lot of people didn't like the George Ted combo and how they evaluated football ops and are hoping a lot more for Kevin Warren's involvement there, which he certainly seems to be from a visual perspective here over the last 8 months. So for you on this, is this going to be Kevin Warren's kind of baby this offseason to evaluate Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus? I'm not saying he's evaluating, if Kevin Jenkins should be at a contract extension, but in terms of evaluating the top of football operations, is that his focal point right now?
Yeah, certainly it's going to be something he'll have a heavy hand in. There's no question about it. I don't think the president, CEO fires GMs and head coaches without getting the blessing of ownership, right? Like, those guys report to Kevin Warren, okay? So he's in charge, but that you could get yourself in trouble in a hurry if you start making unilateral decisions at the top of the organization without bouncing them off of ownership. So, yeah, I think everybody's kind of curious what Kevin's involvement will be, what he'll have to say at the end of the season, and sort of what direction that takes the Bears in, because that's the biggest and first question you'll have for this team at the end of the season is, okay, now what? 2024 is here. There's some pivotal decisions. The GM and coach were hired a year before Kevin was hired. So where do they go from now? I don't think Kevin was in on hiring and firings in Minnesota when he was with the Vikings. So this will be a new experience for him, maybe an expanded role on the football side. The Vikings had a pretty clear delineation between football operations and business side, and he was on the business side, but he's been involved in the National Football League for a mighty long time, and has a deep network of people throughout the league. So I don't think the Bears will be asking him to do something that he's not prepared to do.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with that. And in my estimation, because I know I've seen a spattering of people that feel, well, he's here to build the stadium, and certainly that's going to be a big.
That's why he was hired, though. Like, I mean, seriously, that's why he was hired. In a perfect world, he's not worried about his football operations at the end of this season. I mean, to me, that was the number one reason why he was hired. But he was given charge of all this, though, and any stadium stuff will have to take a back seat at this time of year and next month as they try to figure out what direction. I mean, who knows? Maybe they keep everybody. I don't know. Maybe everybody's gone, but Kevin's going to have some involvement, no question about it, in whatever decision they choose.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of where I was getting at, was that, while he was, the stadium was going to be a big part of his job title in essence here. It wasn't, you're not leaving the Big Ten commissionership to build a stadium. You're leaving the Big Ten to preside over, one of the premier franchises in the NFL and build a stadium as part of it. So as I kind of trickle down through here, let me ask you about Ryan Poles, because I think, over the last month here, if people were questioning if Ryan Poles should or shouldn't return, pretty much everything's been positive. I think for Ryan Poles over the past month, I think Montez Sweat, he made a bold move and he's made an impact already. Jervon Dexter's improving, Tyreek Stevenson's improving, Darnell Wright looks the part. So I think in terms of talent evaluation, Ryan Poles looks pretty good. And I don't know if his seat is warm or not. I think that's a question we won't get to answer for another 5 weeks. But my opinion, and you tell me if you disagree, as an organization, I have a hard time imagining that you give the green light to make a move for Montez Sweat and pay him what you need to pay him if you don't really think the GM is the right guy for the job.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly one way to look at it. I think that based on what I've seen and heard, I think Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles have a strong working relationship that they're probably still developing, right? Like, Kevin hasn't been in the building for all that long. He was hired last January, but he didn't start till April, right?
Yeah.
So I think they've probably hit it off to start with, and I mean, you start whacking GMs and coaches after 2 years, and like I get questions all the time, Bill, why don't they fire a coach in season? And, well, how's that working out for Mark Davis? Like he's got a lot of experience doing that. How's that working out for David Tepper? Like, what do you get out of that? So I would think that Poles is okay, and more than okay. I'd think that Poles is on solid ground right now with Kevin Warren, with George McCaskey. Listen, when Poles was hired, if you go back and you kind of read between the lines of what everybody said, it was clear that the vision he sold the organization at the time, which Kevin wasn't a part of it, but the vision he sold George and Ted and Bill Polian and whoever else is involved was that they were going to have to be very methodical about doing this the right way. Well, doing this the right way doesn't happen in a season. It doesn't happen in a year and a half. And nobody wants to remember that or admit that. And there were the people who thought that when Rodgers left the NFC North, that it was there for the Bears to take over for good, but without really looking back on what they had on the roster last season and how they played. So he sold a vision, I believe anyway, again, reading between the lines of like, hey, it's gonna take time to do this the right way. Well, where are we at in terms of a timeline? We're like 22, 23 months in. So
right.
I think it would be way premature to talk about where he's at now. Should Kevin Warren ask him what their evaluation of C.J. Stroud was? Yeah, if I'm Kevin, I want to know, hey, what you guys have on Stroud? Was there consideration of drafting him? But there's things you want to know, but I think he's probably positioned pretty well right now.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And, for me, I always think, you need to give a GM 3 off seasons before you can really evaluate what they've done. And when you look at what he's going to have in this 3rd off season with draft capital and more cap space, he's going to have done a really solid job, it looks like, in overhauling this roster and getting a lot of good pieces on there. And so with those pieces, let me ask you then, I think the next evaluation then becomes Matt Eberflus, right? And how he's done. And I think there's no question that Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator, has really come on the last 2 months. He's got this defense playing really well. Yes, the defense still, Justin Herbert, when you get the really good quarterback in there, as we know, the cover 2 defense can be a little less effective, but beyond that, I mean, phenomenal against the Vikings, phenomenal for 56 minutes against the Lions, the Panthers. The defense is playing really well. So when you're evaluating Matt Eberflus, how do you separate Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator, who looks the part, versus Matt Eberflus, the head coach, which I think, you can certainly find some warts on that resume.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough evaluation right now. To me, the more important thing to do really is when you talk about separating, and this is just the way I look at it, and I understand what you're saying. I look at it as you have to take 2022 and completely separate it from 2023. Like, you just look at the roster that Eberflus and the assistants had last year, and I think you understand that they were in a no-win situation. And what happened? Well, they didn't win. They went 3-14. And I think and 3-14 is always going to be on his record, his resume. Like, that's his. Okay, but to evaluate him in terms of effectiveness as a head coach with the talent that he had last year, I don't know, man. Bill Parcells in his prime's probably not going to win many games with that outfit. And so I look at it as kind of dividing the one season from the next and looking at it, and it's awful hard to judge a guy on 1 year. We'd be having a much different conversation about this football team had it not blown the late leads against Detroit and Denver. Like,
it'd be 6-6.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be talking about, wild card and all that kind of stuff. So it's I think Eberflus is going to have to answer some tough questions if he stays. I don't know what direction it's going to go in, and there's going to be a lot of factors that play into this. And I'm just throwing this out as a possibility, Bill. But if they're going to draft a quarterback in round 1, and I believe that will happen, is there going to be a feeling within the building that, and maybe we need an offensive head coach? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm just throwing it out as a possibility. And there's a lot of other questions we could be on until mid-afternoon, kicking around the different possibilities that they might consider. But yeah, defensively they've gotten better, certainly better than they were with Alan Williams. There's some creativity, talking to scouts that I trust. You could see a clear plan from week to week, right? And it's not, and it's obviously opponent based, but you could see, okay, here's what the goal of the coaching staff was. Here's how they're trying to handicap the opponent. And I think you've seen some player development on that side. They still need pieces. They need another edge rusher. They need Javon Dexter and Zach Pickens to continue to improve, or they need help at that position. But they've made some strides, and I'm curious to see how they play down the stretch. Like, they haven't faced world beaters on offense here lately, but you don't get to pick your schedule. You got to play who's on it this coming weekend, and they've done well.
Yeah, no, some of these young players are really coming on, and I think that's what makes this, like, and all the points you pointed out about how complicated this situation is going to be. And I can't come up with a comparable situation where you have, a quarterback who looks, the part sometimes, certainly still needs to develop, but sitting there with potentially a number 1 pick, and how do you decipher that? And a head coach who's done certain things well, but overall there's been some question marks. And obviously the start of the season was so poor here that 4-4 over their last 8, which is, I think, kind of was the hope this season, right? That they could kind of push to be a 500 team, not make the playoffs necessarily, but and that's who they've been now the last, but it was just buried because of that start. So do you think when it comes down to it, when you're evaluating Matt Eberflus and trying to look at this last stretch here, is it, if they go 3-2 and maybe finish the year beating the Packers or something like that, is that potentially enough to 7-10 and what that'd be 6-5, whatever it is, or 7-6 over their last 13 games? Could it just come down to a simple, they're winning games with Matt Eberflus, so let's move it forward?
I think it's probably got to go a little bit deeper than that. I think it's probably got to involve the eye test a little bit, right? Like, kind of the feel for it. Um, do you feel like there's momentum that your coaching staff has built up with the roster? Beating the Packers will be important for the McCaskey family. There's no question about that. But like, come on, you beat the Arizona Cardinals on Christmas Eve. Like, I'm not putting a whole lot of.
That's how I feel. Yeah.
What I'm doing moving forward on that, the Falcons, like that's a team that's gotten better in the last year. That like no clue what they're doing at quarterback, right? Like it's just they're out there in no man's land with the other teams that don't have a quarterback, and the Browns with whoever in the world they're going to play. So I don't think you could put too much into it, but it's a combination of record and feel, and like I think you need to have a real, and this is hard to do, man. You need to have a real sober conversation about your roster. Where's the roster now? Where was it at the start of the year? Like, has it gotten better? Has there been enough improvement? And those are tough questions to have, because when you're asked to like honestly evaluate your own players, man, I mean that's really, really tricky. As Jerry Angelo used to say, it's really easy for me, Bill, to tell you about all the crap that's in your backyard, right? It's a little more difficult for me to look out the window in the back of my place and say, yeah, I got a bunch of junk back there.
Yeah. And so speaking of, evaluating this roster and improvement, let's talk about the quarterback position. And you brought it up that you feel that they're probably going to be drafting a quarterback this year. And it certainly seems to me to be trending that way, especially if they have the number one pick. I guess number two, if Williams goes one and they're not in love with May, maybe they decide something different. But I think that's what this wild card has been, is this Carolina Panthers pick, where, now if Justin Fields was playing, like a top 5 quarterback in the league, certainly that would change the conversation completely. But with Justin Fields still being up and down as he's been here at this late in the season, I just think if you're sitting with that pick and having a chance to reset the quarterback clock, where you can pay Montez Sweat, you could go out. I know you mentioned in a recent column that maybe Danielle Hunter, like you can get 2 or 3 of these really large contracts and play them out here for the next 3-4 years with a rookie quarterback and really beef up the roster around it. So to me, it's almost independent of the Fields evaluation at this point, because he hasn't knocked your socks off, at the beginning of December, that you just have this opportunity where, and I'll also say this, if you're a general manager and you do decide to trade down again and you pass that, now, we don't know what Bryce Young is. It doesn't look good so far, but you pass on CJ Stroud. And if Caleb Williams and Drake May also turn out, and you have a pretty good quarterback, you have an athletic Jay Cutler, that's going to eventually cost you your job when you kept passing on elite quarterbacks.
That's a fireable offense. Yeah. Like, Poles said last January that he'd have to be blown away to use the number 1 pick a year ago on a quarterback. Obviously,
I think he'll be blown away this time. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I flip it around. To me, and these are my words, not Poles' words, but I think he has to be blown away to want to move forward with Justin Fields, because in my opinion, Bill, you've got to be all in, meaning you got to be ready to talk about a contract extension with him, or you got to be out. Like you can't try to play this one down the middle. Yeah, we'll pick up the 5th-year option. We want to see more. You're either all in or you're out. And I just there hasn't been anything in my mind that would make you say, yeah, it's a really good idea to be all in on him as a quarterback. It just hasn't come together yet. And there's people out there that think they should continue to build around him and surround him with talent. And the popular thing that I get anyway, Bill, is like draft Marvin Harrison Jr., which fantastic player, right? Draft a left tackle. Well, here's my counter to that. And my counter isn't that Marvin Harrison isn't fabulous or that you can't get a great left tackle. My counter to that is, for starters, Braxton Jones isn't the problem on the offensive line this season.
No.
Can you get a better player than him? Sure. Is he going to the Pro Bowl? Probably not. They need to fix the center position. And then if they added Marvin Harrison Jr., how's Fields going to get him and DJ Moore the ball? They don't throw the ball to Darnell Mooney right now, and it's not because Mooney isn't open. Darnell Mooney's averaging 3.5 targets per game. 8 of his 12 games this season, he has 2 touches or less. He's had 3 occasions this season of more than 4 targets in a game. 2 of those were starts by Tyson Bagent. They don't, and he's played 73% of the offensive snaps. He doesn't get the ball. So take this offense, add a left tackle, add Marvin Harrison. DJ and Marvin are going to have to figure out who gets the ball because it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, and that's where I know a lot of fans were excited for the finish of the Vikings game with the big throw to DJ Moore, and after the fumble, and it was a great throw, and Justin Fields, everyone's like, he put his stamp down. Hey, I can make the big throw in the clutch, and he proved it. And I don't think anyone thought he didn't have that ability. They just hadn't seen it. But at the same time, I sit there, if I'm trying to just be a fair evaluator and not just keep the pom-poms on, even just the play before, before the DJ Moore play, Darnell Mooney is streaking over the middle, 15 yards down the field with his arm raised. EQ Brown is in the corner, open, and that's before Fields rolled out to the left. I know on the broadcast they said, well, that was across the field, but he was already there when Fields was still in the pocket. So to me, I still sit there and say he held on to the ball 8 seconds, had opportunities, and yes, he made the play the next time, but he missed it the time before, and we're still on, in essence, the Justin Fields roller coaster. The play hasn't leveled out.
Yeah, it's just a it's a lack of consistency of high level quarterback play, and what you get when he flashes, when he pops is amazing stuff. Serious highlight reel material. Sure. And the physical gifts he's got are off the charts, right? You talk about a combination of size, strength, speed, arm talent. It's crazy. But the total package, it just kind of hasn't clicked, not on a consistent basis. And when you have a struggling franchise, which no one's going to say the Bears haven't been a struggling franchise, and you're at the very top of the draft in consecutive years, and in the first year, you didn't take a swing at C.J. Stroud, and in the second year, by all accounts, it's a pretty darn good draft for quarterbacks. Maybe none of them are perfect, but it's a pretty darn good draft for quarterbacks. I don't even think there's really a conversation that it needs to be held, Bill. I don't think this is like some, all right, we've blocked off the next week and a half at Hallis Hall for meetings. I think it happens pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would tend to agree there. And the one thing, and then I just have one more to ask you. I got to ask you about Jim Harbaugh. But the one thing about this situation, if they bring in, whether it's Caleb Williams or Drake May, you're actually in a pretty good position if you have the right coach in place or offensive coordinator in place. It's going to be a solid offensive line. If you get a center, you're going to have DJ Moore, a good running game, Cole Kmet. There's pieces where you just plop a rookie in and you can have success pretty quickly, I think, if the quarterback hits.
I think that's a strong pushback for the crowd out there that says that why would they rebuild again? I don't view it as, I'm with you, Bill. I don't look at it as they're rebuilding if they go out and get a new quarterback. Hey, is there going to be some bumpy periods at the start? Yeah, probably, right?
There's going to be bumpy periods with Fields, too.
Yeah, unless the guy's a unicorn, there's going to be some bumpy parts. Is there a chance they miss on the quarterback? Yeah, there's a hell of a chance they miss. But they need to take a swing, and to your point, the offensive line is better. The skill position talent is better. We had a nice discussion about improvements that they've made defensively. Justin was put into a very difficult situation. He's not alone in terms of highly drafted quarterbacks, in the spot that he found himself in, almost set up to fail, and through no fault of his own, right? And it kind of is what it is. It would appear that if they do go out and get a quarterback, that the next one will have a better starting point.
Absolutely.
Based on nothing more than maybe good fortune for that guy.
All right, last thing for you. I got to ask you, because obviously, Jim Harbaugh's name has really started to generate a lot of buzz on Chicago media outlets here the last couple of weeks. And I know anytime there's a coaching change potentially in Chicago, Jim Harbaugh's name is going to come up. It has for, a decade at this point. So for you, do you like that idea if they decide to go that way? Because I've always heard that Harbaugh really wants to run football operations. I don't know if that's true or still true. That's not going to happen with Ryan Poles, assuming he's still here. Is that an idea you like? Because I hear a lot of fans going, I want an offensive-minded coach with NFL experience. There's really only one of those right now available, and that would be Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're going to bring in John Gruden, right? And Gruden's got a lot.
Can't see the McCaskey family doing that.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if they'll go out for does George McCaskey want to hear real talk from Harbaugh? I don't, and I'm asking a question. I'm not saying he doesn't. I'm genuinely curious, because Jim's kind of cut from a different cloth than some of these hires that they've made over the last decade plus since George has been in charge. Harbaugh's name's going to be floated everywhere, though. I mean, you're already hearing about it in Vegas. I talked to a guy last week who thought that Chargers opening had Harbaugh's name written all over it, if indeed they move on from Brandon Staley, pointing out that Harbaugh had spent an awful lot of time in California over the last 20, 30 years. He was coaching at San Diego before he went to Stanford, and he had spent time with the Raiders. But previously, I just his name's going to be attached to nearly every opening every year, until he stamps it out, right? Sure. You never hear about, I don't know, you never hear Dabo Sweeney or Nick Saban's name, right? Because they just, I think Harbaugh enjoys it. I think he thought he was headed to the Minnesota Vikings 2 years ago. That didn't happen. We'll see. But you make a great point. Like that offensive guy with head coaching experience, that the ones that are available are available because they failed miserably. Like if you're any good at that, right, you're cashing checks right now.
Yeah, Nathaniel Hackett is not a coaching candidate this year.
Yeah, and I get this, like they've got to hire someone with experience, and I push back on that big time, Bill. And in terms of head coaching experience, like it's this whole notion that the organization is cheap, and listen, the Bears earned that for decades, but I don't believe that's the case now. And I think more importantly, they need to hire the right coach. Like look at how many teams out there right now are playing really well with a coach that where he's at, he was a first-time hire, okay, or first-time head coach. Like Kyle Shanahan is not in year one in San Francisco, but he's a first-time head coach for the 49ers, right? And that guy hit the ground running pretty quickly out there and is running a pretty good operation. So I think you got to focus on hiring the right guy, if indeed that's an avenue they're going to head down.
All right. Well, there he is. Chicago Tribune's Brad Biggs, at Brad Biggs on Twitter/X. I'm sure you're all following him already. Brad, thanks for so much time. It was a great conversation, wonderful insight, and good luck the rest of the season. Hopefully they give you some fun games to cover.
Thanks, Bill. Have a great holiday season.